Welcome to Stories with the Hidden African Folklore Tales. We would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe and enjoy our content. To ensure you don't miss any more of our films, please share this one with your friends and family and enable post notifications. I'm grateful. As we begin the story, take a seat back and unwind. The grand hall was adorned with sparkling chandeliers, cascading floral arrangements, and golden accents, a perfect reflection of the opulence Alex had worked so hard to achieve. Guests in designer attire filled the room, their laughter and clinking glasses creating a celebratory atmosphere. Alex, in a tailored tuxedo, stood at the center of it all, hand in hand with Sophia, his stunning bride. Sophia was radiant in her custom-made gown, her smile dazzling as she mingled with the elite. Yet, amidst the glamour, Alex felt a strange unease. As he glanced around the room, he couldn't help but think back to the simpler days of his life, the days when wealth and status weren't his sole focus. The thought lingered, a subtle discomfort he couldn't shake. While Sophia basked in the attention of their guests, Alex's mind wandered to the long journey that had brought him to this point. From humble beginnings, he had clawed his way to the top, building a business empire that earned him both admiration and envy. But the cost of his ambition was a price he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge. He glanced at Sophia, who was busy chatting with a senator's wife, and felt a pang of guilt. She deserved his undivided attention, yet his thoughts were elsewhere. He pushed the feeling aside, determined to enjoy the day, though the weight of something unspoken pressed against his chest. Alex made his way through the crowd as the evening went on, shaking hands and sharing pleasantries. He made an effort to concentrate, but the discomfort persisted. Every chuckle was hollow, every grin fake. In his heart, he knew it was more than wedding day anxiety, but he persuaded himself it was just that. This wedding was supposed to represent a new beginning, a new phase in his life, but it seemed like the past was tearing at the edges of his ideal day, threatening to tear down the facade he had worked so hard to create. Alex's world tilted on its axis when he spotted a familiar figure among the catering staff. She was bent over a table, wiping it down with deliberate, measured movements. Her hair, tied back in a messy bun, framed a face he had once known better than his own, Emma. For a moment, he thought he was imagining things. His ex-wife, here at his wedding. It seemed impossible. But as she straightened up and placed a tray on the table, her profile confirmed it. Her dark, glowing complexion, her soft almond-shaped eyes now shadowed with fatigue, it was undoubtedly her. Then, his gaze dropped to her swollen belly, and his breath hitched. She was pregnant. Emma didn't notice him at first, too focused on her task. But as Alex continued to stare, unable to look away, she finally turned and froze. Their eyes met, and the shock in her expression mirrored his own. Her hand trembled slightly as she clutched the tray, and for a brief second, neither of them moved. Then, as if regaining her composure, Emma quickly averted her gaze and hurried away, blending into the crowd of servers. Alex stood rooted to the spot, his mind racing. Questions bombarded him. Why was she here? How could this be happening on his wedding day? And most pressing of all, whose child was she carrying? The rest of the reception became a blur. Alex's focus was no longer on Sophia or their guests. His eyes scanned the room, searching for Emma, but she had seemingly vanished. His emotions were a chaotic mix of anger, guilt, and confusion. He couldn't understand why seeing her affected him so deeply, but it did. He tried to reason with himself, telling himself it was mere curiosity, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. Emma's presence was a reminder of a chapter in his life he thought he had closed, a chapter that now seemed far from over. Alex's mind was a storm of memories as he sat at the head table, barely noticing the toasts and laughter around him. His thoughts drifted to the days when Emma had been his world. He remembered the first time he saw her at a small cafe near his college campus. She had been laughing with friends, her warm, infectious smile lighting up the room. She was different from anyone he had ever met, grounded, compassionate, and endlessly supportive of his dreams. Their love had been passionate and intense, but it wasn't without its challenges. They had married young, full of hope, but unprepared for the trials life would throw their way. As his ambition grew, so did the distance between them. Alex had thrown himself into his work, often leaving Emma to fend for herself emotionally. He convinced himself it was for their future, but in reality, it was his own insecurities driving him to prove his worth. Emma had tried to hold on, but the cracks in their relationship deepened. He remembered the arguments, the nights she cried herself to sleep while he sat in his office, ignoring her pain. The memory of the day she left was etched into his mind. Her voice had trembled as she told him she couldn't stay in a marriage where she felt invisible. He hadn't stopped her, too proud to admit he was wrong. Now, seeing her at his wedding, pregnant and working as a server, the guilt hit him like a tidal wave. He had moved on, or so he thought. But Emma's presence had reopened wounds he didn't even realize were still there. As the evening wore on, Alex found himself questioning everything. Had he truly moved on, or had he simply buried the past, hoping it would never resurface? And why, despite all the pain, did seeing Emma ignite a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years, regret, longing, and an ache he couldn't explain? Alex couldn't let the night end without confronting Emma. The weight of seeing her again, pregnant, working at his wedding reception, was too much to bear. After discreetly scanning the venue for what felt like hours, he finally spotted her near the kitchen entrance, quietly stacking empty trays. She seemed smaller, more fragile than he remembered, though there was still an air of resilience about her. He approached her cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. "Emma," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the clatter of dishes. She froze, her shoulders tensing before she turned to face him. Her expression was guarded, her eyes flickering with a mix of surprise and defiance. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice sharp but tinged with something else, concern, perhaps. Emma straightened, her posture meeting his gaze with quiet dignity. "I'm working, Alex." "That much should be obvious," she replied coolly, though her voice betrayed a hint of unease. Alex felt a surge of emotions, anger, guilt, and an overwhelming sense of protectiveness. "At my wedding? How? Why would you put yourself in this position?" he pressed, unable to understand why she hadn't simply walked away when she saw his name on the event list. Emma's lips tightened, and she shook her head. "I didn't have a choice. Not everyone gets to live in luxury, Alex. Some of us have to take what we can get." Her words stung, cutting through his pride like a blade. He searched her face for answers, for any trace of the woman he had once loved, but all he saw was exhaustion and pain. Before he could ask the question burning in his mind, she stepped back, her hand resting protectively over her belly. "I have work to do," she said, turning away. Alex watched her disappear into the kitchen, his heart heavy with questions he didn't yet have the courage to ask. Alex spent the rest of the night in a daze, replaying the encounter with Emma over and over in his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about the baby she was carrying, about the way her voice had trembled when she spoke to him. He wanted answers, but he didn't know where to begin. What had happened to her since their divorce? Why was she working as a server when she deserved so much more? And most importantly, was the child his? The possibility haunted him, twisting his stomach into knots. Yet, deep down, he couldn't ignore the truth. If the baby was his, he had failed her in more ways than he could count. The next morning, Alex found himself pacing his office, torn between anger and guilt. He tried to focus on the tasks at hand, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Emma. Her words echoed in his mind, "Some of us have to take what we can get." He hated the idea that she had been reduced to this, but he couldn't deny that his own choices had played a role in her struggles. His relentless ambition had cost him their marriage, and now, it seemed, it had cost her even more. He picked up his phone, tempted to call her, but stopped himself. What would he even say? How could he ask the questions weighing on his heart without reopening old wounds? Unable to shake his need for answers, Alex made a decision. He would find a way to speak to her again, whether she wanted to or not. He needed to know the truth, not just for his own peace of mind, but because he owed it to her. He owed her an apology, at the very least, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to make things right. But as he prepared to reach out, he couldn't help but wonder if Emma would ever forgive him for the role he had played in her pain. While Alex wrestled with his emotions, Sophia began to notice his distraction. At first, she chalked it up to post-wedding exhaustion, but as the days went by, his behavior grew increasingly strange. He spent long hours in his office, often staring out the window or pacing the floor. When she tried to talk to him, he seemed distant, offering vague excuses and brushing off her concerns. Sophia prided herself on being perceptive, and she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong. Her intuition told her that Alex was hiding something, and the thought filled her with unease. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Sophia decided to confront him. "You've been acting strange lately," she said, her tone light but probing. "Is everything okay?" Alex looked up from his plate, startled by the question. "Of course," he said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just work stress. You know how it is." Sophia studied him carefully, noting the tension in his shoulders and the way he avoided her gaze. "You're sure that's all it is?" she pressed, her voice soft but firm. Alex hesitated for a fraction of a second, and in that moment, Sophia's suspicions deepened. "I'm fine, Sophia," he said, his tone more curt than he intended. "Can we just enjoy dinner?" Sophia didn't push further, but the seed of doubt had been planted. She began to watch him more closely, noting the way he seemed preoccupied and distracted. Her instincts told her that whatever was bothering him wasn't just about work. She had no idea what secrets Alex was keeping, but she was determined to find out. And as the tension between them grew, she couldn't help but wonder if their perfect marriage was beginning to crack before it had truly begun. As the wedding celebrations drew to a close, Alex couldn't shake the image of Emma from his mind. Guests were still lingering, the music had softened to a slow tempo, and Sophia was busy taking photos with friends and family. But Alex felt disconnected, like he was watching his own life from a distance. He sat in a corner of the grand ballroom, nursing a glass of champagne that had lost its fizz, his thoughts consumed by the unexpected encounter. He had worked so hard to build this life, yet seeing Emma again made him question whether he had truly moved on. The guilt was unbearable. How could he enjoy this luxurious wedding, knowing that someone he once loved was struggling so visibly? As the staff began clearing tables, Alex discreetly approached one of the servers. The young man seemed startled but quickly composed himself. "The woman who was working here earlier, the one who's pregnant," Alex began, keeping his voice low. "Do you know anything about her?" The server hesitated, glancing around nervously. "You mean Emma?" he asked, and Alex's heart skipped a beat at the sound of her name. She's had a rough time, sir. She only took this job because she needed the money. I think her landlord's been threatening to evict her. She doesn't talk much, though." Alex clenched his fists, anger and shame boiling inside him. He had never imagined that Emma's life had spiraled to this extent. By the time he returned to Sophia, the weight of what he had learned was suffocating. She looked radiant, her laughter filling the room as she chatted with a group of her friends. But Alex could barely meet her eyes. His mind was elsewhere, on Emma, on the baby, on the life he had left behind. As they made their way to the car to leave for their honeymoon suite, Sophia slipped her arm around his, whispering about how perfect the day had been. Alex nodded absent-mindedly, his heart heavy with guilt. The perfection of the wedding felt like a cruel irony, knowing that someone he had once vowed to protect was now living in such pain. Alex couldn't sleep that night. As Sophia drifted off beside him, her arm resting lightly on his chest, he stared at the ceiling, his mind a tangled web of memories and emotions. He thought about Emma, about how they had fallen in love so quickly, so passionately, and how it had all unraveled. Their love had been imperfect but real, built on dreams and promises that had seemed unbreakable at the time. He remembered how she had believed in him when no one else did, standing by his side as he struggled to build his business from the ground up. She had been his anchor, his partner in every sense of the word. And yet, he had let her slip through his fingers. As his business began to grow, so did his ambition. Late nights at the office turned into missed dinners, forgotten anniversaries, and broken promises. Emma had tried to be patient, but he had taken her patience for granted. He remembered the arguments, the tears, the way her voice would break as she begged him to make time for their marriage. "I just need you to be here," she had said once, her eyes brimming with tears. But he hadn't listened. He had been so focused on proving himself, on building his empire, that he had ignored the cracks forming in their relationship. By the time he realized what he was losing, it was too late. Emma had packed her bags and walked out, leaving him with nothing but regret. Now, years later, the pain of losing her felt as fresh as it had the day she left. He wondered if she still thought about him, if she still hated him for the way he had failed her. And then there was the baby, the child she was carrying. Was it his? The possibility both terrified and excited him, stirring emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, Alex made a silent vow. He couldn't change the past, but he could try to make amends. He didn't know how, but he had to find a way to help Emma, and the child, if it was his. The question of the baby's paternity consumed Alex over the next few days. He found himself staring at his reflection in the mirror, wondering if he could see a trace of himself in the child Emma carried. He didn't want to assume it was possible the baby wasn't his, but the timing lined up too perfectly to ignore. If the child was his, that meant he had a responsibility he couldn't walk away from. But how could he even begin to approach Emma with such a delicate question? The thought of reopening old wounds filled him with dread, but he knew he couldn't avoid it. He had to know the truth. Alex decided to take action. He began by tracking down Emma's address through the event coordinator who had hired the catering company. It wasn't difficult, but the information left him feeling uneasy. She lived in a rundown apartment complex on the outskirts of the city, far removed from the life of comfort he had once imagined for her. The thought of her struggling in such conditions made his chest tighten. How had it come to this? He debated whether to visit her unannounced, worried she might see it as an intrusion, but his need for answers outweighed his hesitation. That evening, Alex drove to the apartment, parking his sleek black car on the curb. He felt out of place among the cracked sidewalks and dimly lit buildings, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the surroundings. As he approached her door, he hesitated, his hand hovering over the door frame. The thought of seeing her again, of facing the pain he had caused, made his heart pound. Finally, he knocked, the sound echoing in the quiet hallway. When the door opened, Emma stood there, her expression a mix of surprise and guardedness. "Alex," she said, her voice steady but cool. "What are you doing here?" He took a deep breath, his eyes flickering to her rounded belly. "I need to know," Emma, he said softly. Is the baby mine? After the brief yet charged exchange at the door, Emma hesitated before letting Alex into her apartment. Her reluctance was clear, but there was also a flicker of exhaustion in her eyes, as though she was too tired to fight him off. She stepped aside silently, allowing him to enter the small, dimly lit space. Alex's heart sank as he took in his surroundings. The apartment was barely furnished, just a sagging couch, a scratched coffee table, and a worn rug that seemed to have seen better days. The faint hum of an old refrigerator filled the quiet. He couldn't reconcile the Emma he had known, who once dreamed of starting her own business and building a beautiful home, with the woman struggling to make ends meet in this tiny apartment. Emma crossed her arms and leaned against the door frame, her posture defensive. You got what you came for, she said coldly. Take a good look and leave. Alex ignored her sharp tone, his eyes lingering on the modest crib tucked in a corner of the living room. His heart ached at the sight of it, imagining how much she must have sacrificed to prepare for this baby. Why didn't you tell me? He finally asked, his voice thick with emotion. Emma scoffed, shaking her head. Tell you what? That I'm barely scraping by. That I'm carrying a child while juggling odd jobs just to survive? What would it have changed, Alex? You made it clear a long time ago that your priorities don't include me. Her words cut deep, and Alex struggled to find a response. He had no excuse for how he had treated her during their marriage, and now, seeing the consequences of his neglect, the guilt was almost unbearable. I want to help, he said quietly, stepping closer. Emma straightened, her gaze hardening. I don't need your pity, she snapped. I've managed this far without you, and I'll keep managing. But as she turned away, Alex caught a glimpse of the pain in her eyes, and he knew she wasn't as strong as she wanted him to believe. Alex couldn't let it end like that. He stood his ground, determined to get the answers he came for. Emma, he said firmly, I just want to know the truth. Is the baby mine? Emma froze, her back to him. For a long moment, the silence was deafening. Finally, she turned around, her arms still crossed protectively over her chest. Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The baby is yours. The confirmation hit Alex like a freight train, leaving him momentarily speechless. He had suspected it, but hearing the words spoken aloud made it real in a way he wasn't prepared for. He sat down heavily on the couch, his mind racing. How long have you known? He asked after a moment, his voice tinged with hurt. Emma's eyes flashed with anger. Since the day I found out I was pregnant, Alex. But why does it matter? You were busy living your life, building your empire, planning your perfect wedding. I didn't think you'd care. Her words stung, and Alex felt a fresh wave of guilt wash over him. That's not fair, he said softly. You never gave me the chance to care. You didn't tell me. Emma's expression softened slightly, but her tone remained firm. Because I didn't want you to feel obligated. I've been through enough, Alex. I didn't want to beg for scraps of your attention like I did before. Alex's chest tightened at the raw emotion in her voice. He wanted to argue, to tell her that he wasn't the same man he had been during their marriage, but deep down, he knew she had every reason to doubt him. I'm not asking for a second chance, he said finally. But I want to be there for the baby, for both of you. Please, let me help. Emma hesitated, the conflict in her eyes clear. She didn't trust him, but the vulnerability in her gaze suggested she wanted to believe he was sincere. We'll see, she said at last, her voice quiet. But don't make promises you can't keep, Alex. The drive back to his mansion was a blur. Alex couldn't stop replaying the conversation in his mind, the weight of Emma's words pressing heavily on his chest. He felt as though he had failed her all over again, and now, there was an innocent child involved. His child. The realization was overwhelming. For years, he had buried himself in work, convincing himself that success would make up for all the mistakes he had made. But now, standing at the pinnacle of his career, he felt more like a failure than ever. He couldn't shake the image of Emma's tired eyes, her small apartment, or the way she had held herself as though bracing for yet another disappointment. When Alex arrived home, Sophia was waiting for him in the living room, her expression expectant. "You're late," she said, her tone light but questioning. Alex hesitated, unsure how to explain his absence. "I got caught up with something," he said vaguely, avoiding her gaze. Sophia frowned, sensing that something was off. "Alex, what's going on with you? You've been distracted ever since the wedding. Is there something you're not telling me?" Her words made his stomach churn. He knew he couldn't tell her about Emma, not yet, anyway. The truth would shatter the carefully constructed image of their perfect life, and he wasn't ready for that fallout. "I'm just dealing with work stress," he lied, forcing a smile. "It'll pass." Sophia didn't look convinced, but she let the matter drop, for now. As she headed upstairs, Alex sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. He felt trapped, torn between the life he had built with Sophia and the responsibilities he owed to Emma and their unborn child. For the first time in years, he felt completely lost. But one thing was clear, he couldn't ignore Emma or the baby. No matter how difficult it would be, he had to find a way to make things right, and he had to do it without destroying everything else in the process. Sophia had always prided herself on being a woman who could read people, and lately, Alex had become a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Since the wedding, his behavior had changed. He was more withdrawn, more preoccupied. At first, she brushed it off as the stress of balancing work with the excitement of their new life together. But as the days turned into weeks, the distance between them grew more noticeable. He would disappear for hours, offering vague explanations about business meetings or errands, yet his excuses lacked the usual confidence that defined him. She began to feel like a stranger in her own marriage, and the thought unnerved her. One evening, Sophia decided to test the waters. As they sat at the dining table, she casually asked, "How was your day? You've been out a lot lately." Alex, caught off guard, hesitated for a split second before replying, "It's been hectic. Just dealing with some loose ends at work." His response was too quick, too rehearsed, and Sophia noticed the way his hand tensed around his glass. "You've been working late a lot for someone who just got married," she pressed, her tone light but probing. Alex gave her a strange smile. "You know how it is. Deadlines don't wait for personal milestones." But his explanation didn't sit right with her. Sophia had been with Alex long enough to know when he was hiding something. That night, as Alex showered, Sophia sat on the edge of their bed, her mind racing. She wanted to trust him. After all, they had just embarked on what was supposed to be a lifelong partnership. But the nagging doubt wouldn't go away. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was keeping something from her, something big. Determined to uncover the truth, Sophia resolved to keep a closer eye on him. Whatever secret Alex was hiding, she intended to find out. Alex couldn't stay away. Despite Emma's guarded demeanor and her repeated refusals of his help, he found himself drawn to her apartment more and more. At first, he told himself it was purely for the baby, that he needed to ensure the child would have a better life than what Emma could provide on her own. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. Each visit brought back memories of the woman he had once loved so deeply, and he couldn't help but wonder if there was still a part of her that cared for him too. He began bringing groceries, small gifts for the baby, and even money, though Emma often rejected it outright. During one visit, he noticed how exhausted she looked, her swollen feet propped up on an old chair. "You shouldn't be working like this," he said, placing a bag of groceries on the counter. "It's not good for you or the baby." Emma shot him a withering look. "And what do you suggest, Alex? That I sit around and wait for you to swoop in and save the day? I don't need your charity." Her words stung, but Alex refused to back down. "It's not charity," he said firmly. "It's responsibility. That baby is mine, and I'm not going to stand by and let you struggle alone." Their conversations often ended in tension, with Emma's pride clashing against Alex's determination to help. But gradually, her resistance began to soften. She started accepting small gestures, a ride to her doctor's appointment, a few hours of rest while Alex helped with chores. Though their dynamic was far from harmonious, there were moments when the walls between them seemed to crumble, and Alex glimpsed the vulnerability Emma tried so hard to hide. Those moments only deepened his resolve to be there for her, no matter how difficult it might be. One evening, as they sat in her cramped living room, Emma finally opened up in a way Alex hadn't expected. She was seated on the couch, her hands resting on her rounded belly, her eyes distant. "Do you know what it was like, Alex?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling. "Watching you chase your dreams while I felt like I was fading into the background." Alex, taken aback, didn't know how to respond. "I never meant to make you feel that way," he said softly. Emma let out a bitter laugh. "I know you didn't. But that doesn't change the fact that you did." She began to recount the years of their marriage, the loneliness she had endured while Alex worked late nights and traveled for business. "I wanted to support you," she said, her voice breaking. "I believed in you, in us. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like your wife and started feeling like an afterthought." Her words were raw, filled with pain that had clearly been bottled up for far too long. Alex listened in silence, his chest tightening with regret. He had always thought he was doing the right thing by focusing on his career, but now he realized how blind he had been to Emma's struggles. "I don't want your pity, Alex," Emma said, wiping away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. "I've made my peace with the past. But I need you to understand that I can't let you walk in and out of my life whenever it's convenient for you. This baby deserves better. I deserve better." Her words hit Alex like a hammer, shattering any illusions he had about simply stepping back into her life. He realized then that earning her trust would be the hardest thing he'd ever done. But as he looked at her, so strong yet so vulnerable, he knew he couldn't give up. He had to prove, not with words but with actions, that he was ready to take responsibility for her, for the baby, and for the pain he had caused. The tension between Alex and Sophia continued to grow. Sophia wasn't blind to the fact that her husband was becoming more distant by the day. His excuses for being late grew weaker, his gaze more distracted during their conversations. It was the kind of subtle shift she had seen happen in other relationships, the kind that signaled something was being hidden. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Sophia decided she couldn't keep pretending nothing was wrong. "Alex," she began, her voice calm but firm, "I need to know what's going on with you. You've been so distant lately, and I feel like I'm losing you." Alex looked up from his phone, startled by the sudden confrontation. "I don't know what you mean," he replied, though his tone lacked conviction. Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Don't do that," she said sharply. "Don't pretend everything is fine when it's not. You've been acting strange since the wedding. I need you to be honest with me. What's going on?" For a moment, Alex considered telling her the truth. He imagined confessing everything, about Emma, about the baby, about the guilt that had consumed him since that night. But fear held him back. He didn't want to destroy the life he had built with Sophia, not when he wasn't even sure how things with Emma would play out. "It's just work," he said finally, avoiding her gaze. "There's a lot on my plate right now." Sophia didn't believe him, but she didn't push further. Instead, she studied him in silence, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something big. As Alex retreated upstairs, leaving her alone in the living room, Sophia felt a flicker of doubt creep into her heart. She had thought their marriage was solid, unshakable. But now, she wasn't so sure. And as her suspicion grew, so did her determination to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Alex found himself imagining a future he hadn't considered in years, a future with Emma and the child she was carrying. His visits to her apartment had become a routine, and though their interactions were often tense, he felt a growing sense of responsibility for her well-being. He began to picture himself as a father, holding the baby for the first time, teaching them to walk, being there for every milestone. The thought filled him with a mixture of excitement and fear. He had spent so long chasing success that he had never stopped to think about what it would mean to build a family, to truly be present for someone other than himself. One evening, as he sat with Emma on her worn couch, he found the courage to share his thoughts. "I want to be there for the baby," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the crib in the corner. "Not just financially, but in every way that matters. I want to be a part of their life." Emma glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "You're saying that now," she replied cautiously. "But what happens when things get hard? What happens when your other life starts demanding more of your time?" Her words stung because they were true. Alex knew he had a history of prioritizing his ambition over everything else. But this time, he was determined to prove her wrong. "I'm not the same man I was when we were married," he said earnestly. "I know I let you down before, but I won't let the baby down. I won't let you down." Emma's eyes softened slightly, but she remained guarded. "We'll see," she said after a moment. "Actions speak louder than words, Alex." Her cautious response only strengthened his resolve. For the first time in years, he felt like he had a purpose beyond his career, a chance to be the man he had always wanted to be. Despite Alex's growing involvement, Emma struggled to trust his intentions. She couldn't forget how their marriage had crumbled under the weight of his ambition, how he had prioritized his work over her, time and time again. Allowing him back into her life, even for the sake of the baby, felt like a risk she wasn't sure she could take. She appreciated his efforts, his frequent visits, the groceries he brought, the way he insisted on helping her with errands, but a part of her couldn't shake the fear that it was all temporary. What if he lost interest? What if he disappeared again, leaving her to pick up the pieces alone? One afternoon, as Alex helped her assemble a second-hand crib he had brought for the baby, Emma finally voiced her concerns. "You've been showing up a lot lately," she said, her tone cautious. "But I can't help wondering how long that's going to last. What happens when this stops being convenient for you?" Alex paused, his hands stilling on the wooden frame of the crib. He looked up at her, his expression serious. "It's not about convenience, Emma," he said firmly. "I'm here because I want to be, not because I have to be. I know I've given you every reason to doubt me, but I'm not going anywhere. I mean that." Emma wanted to believe him, but the scars from their past ran deep. "You say that now," she replied softly. "But what happens when your other life, your wife, your business, starts pulling you in another direction? I'm not going to let myself or this baby be anyone's afterthought." Her words cut Alex deeply, but he didn't let them deter him. "I can change the past," he admitted. "But I can do better now. I will do better." Emma didn't respond immediately, her gaze searching his face for any sign of insincerity. Finally, she nodded, though the doubt in her eyes remained. For Alex, it was a small step forward, a sign that, with time and effort, he might finally be able to earn her trust again. Sophia's patience had reached its limit. She had noticed Alex's frequent absences, his distracted demeanor, and the way he seemed more distant with each passing day. Her growing suspicions led her to take action, hiring a private investigator to uncover the truth. It wasn't a decision she made lightly, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Alex was hiding something monumental. A week later, the investigator returned with answers she hadn't anticipated. Photographs of Alex visiting a modest apartment, spending hours inside, and even carrying groceries sparked a storm of emotions. But what shocked her most was the image of a visibly pregnant Emma standing at the doorway, her hand resting protectively on her stomach as Alex looked on. The truth hit Sophia like a tidal wave. She felt betrayed, humiliated, and deeply hurt. That evening, when Alex returned home, she confronted him. "How long were you planning to keep this from me?" she demanded, holding up one of the photographs. Alex froze, his guilt plain on his face. "Sophia, I can explain," he began, but she cut him off. "Don't bother. The pictures say enough. You've been sneaking around with your ex-wife, and she's pregnant. Is it yours?" Her voice cracked with emotion, a mixture of anger and despair. Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "The baby is mine." Sophia's breath hitched, tears welling in her eyes. "I trusted you," she said, her voice trembling. "I married you, believing we were building a future together. And now this. I need to know where you stand, Alex. It's either me or her. You can't have both." Her ultimatum left Alex speechless. He knew he couldn't continue living a double life, but the choice before him felt impossible. Sophia stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her, leaving Alex alone with the weight of his decisions. For the first time, he realized just how much he stood to lose, and how far-reaching the consequences of his actions had become. Alex spent the night grappling with Sophia's ultimatum. The choice before him was agonizing: stay with Sophia, the woman he had promised to love and cherish, or step up for Emma and their unborn child. Both options carried immense weight, and either decision would leave someone heartbroken. As dawn broke, Alex realized he couldn't delay the inevitable any longer. He owed it to Sophia, to Emma, and to himself to confront the truth and make a decision. He found Sophia in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, her eyes red from crying. "Sophia," he began softly, sitting across from her. "We need to talk." Sophia's expression hardened. "I'm listening," she said, her voice cold. Alex took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he said. "But I can't ignore my responsibility to Emma and the baby. This isn't just about me, it's about doing what's right for them." Sophia's eyes flashed with anger. "And what about me, Alex? What about our marriage? Do we mean so little to you that you're willing to throw it all away?" Her words cut deep, but Alex didn't waver. "This isn't about choosing between you and her," he said. "It's about stepping up as a father. I don't want to hurt you, but I can turn my back on my child." Sophia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You've already hurt me, Alex," she said, her voice shaking. "You made your choice the moment you decided to go back to her." She turned away, her shoulders trembling as she fought back tears. "I can't do this anymore," she said quietly. "I deserve someone who will put me first." Her words were a final blow, and Alex knew there was no salvaging their marriage. As she walked out of the room, Alex felt a mix of relief and sorrow. He had made his choice, but the cost of doing the right thing was higher than he had ever imagined. With his marriage to Sophia effectively over, Alex turned his full attention to Emma and their unborn child. He visited her apartment the next day, feeling a mix of determination and apprehension. Emma opened the door, her expression wary. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone cautious. Alex stepped inside, taking a deep breath. "I've made my decision," he said. "Sophia and I are done. I'm here for you and the baby, whatever that means." Emma's eyes widened in surprise, but she quickly masked her emotions. "And what happens when this gets hard, Alex?" she asked. "Are you going to disappear again when things don't go your way?" Her skepticism was understandable, but Alex was resolute. "I won't walk away this time," he said firmly. "I know I failed you before, but I'm not that man anymore. I want to be here for you, for the baby, for everything." Emma studied him, her arms crossed over her chest. "Words are easy," she said quietly. "Prove it, Alex." Alex nodded, understanding the challenge in her response. "I will," he promised. "Whatever it takes." Over the next few weeks, Alex made good on his word. He attended doctor's appointments with Emma, helped her prepare for the baby, and took on more of the financial burden to ease her stress. Slowly but surely, he began to rebuild her trust, though he knew it would be a long road. For the first time in years, Alex felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with his career. He was no longer the man who prioritized ambition over relationships, and the realization brought him a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. Though the road ahead was uncertain, he was ready to face it head-on. He had chosen responsibility, and he was determined to make things right, no matter what it took. Rebuilding trust with Emma proved to be one of the hardest things Alex had ever done. Though he was now fully committed to being there for her and their child, Emma still held on to the scars of their past. She remained guarded, wary of his promises and skeptical of his sudden desire to take responsibility. Alex understood her hesitation. He had given her every reason to doubt him in the past, but he was determined to show her, through actions rather than words, that he had changed. He started small, showing up on time for every doctor's appointment, bringing over necessities for the baby, and helping her with chores around her apartment. It wasn't much, but it was a start. One day, as they worked together to set up a bassinet Alex had purchased, Emma finally broke the silence. "Why now, Alex?" she asked, her voice soft but tinged with pain. "Why are you doing all of this now, when you couldn't even be there for me when we were married?" Alex paused, his hands tightening on the edge of the bassinet. "Because I made a mistake," he admitted, his voice raw. "I let my ambition blind me to what really mattered. I thought success would make me whole, but all it did was leave me empty. I'm not proud of the man I was, Emma, but I'm trying to be better, for you, for the baby, for myself." Emma didn't respond immediately, her eyes fixed on the bassinet. When she finally spoke, her voice was laced with vulnerability. "I want to believe you, Alex. I really do. But I can't let myself get hurt again." Her words were a painful reminder of how deeply he had failed her, but Alex refused to give up. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight," he said gently. "But I'll keep showing up, every single day, until you know I'm here to stay." Emma nodded slowly, and though her expression remained guarded, there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. It was a small victory, but to Alex, it meant everything. As Emma's due date drew closer, she and Alex began discussing co-parenting arrangements. The conversations were awkward at first, filled with unspoken tension and the lingering wounds of their past. Emma was adamant about maintaining her independence, reminding Alex that she had managed on her own for months before he re-entered her life. "I don't want you thinking you can swoop in and take over," she said firmly during one discussion. "This is still my life, and I won't let you dictate how things are going to be." Alex nodded, understanding her need for control. "I'm not here to take anything from you," he assured her. "I just want to be involved, however you're comfortable with that." Despite the challenges, the conversations gradually became more productive. They agreed that Alex would be present for the birth and that he would take on a significant role in the baby's life, financially, emotionally, and physically. Alex insisted on setting up a nursery at his home, promising that it wasn't about taking the baby away from Emma, but about ensuring their child had everything they needed. Though Emma was hesitant at first, she eventually agreed, realizing that Alex's intentions were genuine. For the first time, she began to see glimpses of the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago, a man who was trying to make amends for his mistakes. One afternoon, as they sorted through baby clothes together, Alex found himself laughing at Emma's dry commentary on some of the outfits. "Who thought neon yellow was a good idea for a baby?" she quipped, holding up a onesie. Alex chuckled, feeling a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. The moment was simple but meaningful, a reminder of the connection they had once shared. Though they still had a long way to go, both Alex and Emma began to feel hopeful about the future, for themselves and for their child. While Alex and Emma worked toward a fragile new understanding, Sophia was consumed by anger and humiliation. She couldn't believe how quickly her perfect life had fallen apart. In the span of a few weeks, she had gone from being a newlywed to feeling like a discarded afterthought. The betrayal cut deeply, and the thought of Alex choosing Emma over her was a blow to her pride. She couldn't ignore it. Sophia wasn't the type to sit idly by and accept defeat. If Alex thought he could walk away from their marriage without consequences, he was sorely mistaken. Using her extensive social connections, Sophia began spreading subtle rumors about Alex's personal life. She painted him as a man who couldn't be trusted, a man who abandoned his commitments at the drop of a hat. At first, the whispers were confined to their social circle, but they quickly spread, reaching some of Alex's business associates. Deals he had been working on for months suddenly fell through, and invitations to exclusive events stopped coming. Alex quickly realized that Sophia was behind the sudden shift, but confronting her proved futile. "You made your choice," she said coldly during a tense phone call. "Now you'll have to live with the consequences." Though Alex was frustrated by Sophia's actions, he refused to let them distract him from what truly mattered. "I've lost contracts before," he told Emma one evening as they unpacked a delivery of diapers. "But I've never lost a chance to do the right thing. Let her spread rumors if that's what she needs to do. I won't let it stop me from being here." Emma, watching his resolve, felt a flicker of admiration she hadn't expected. For the first time, she began to believe that Alex's priorities had truly shifted. And as Sophia's revenge escalated, Alex's unwavering focus on Emma and their child only strengthened the bond between them. It happened sooner than either of them expected. Emma went into labor late one evening while Alex was on his way to her apartment with groceries. She called him in a panic, her voice strained and trembling. "Alex, it's time," she said, barely able to get the words out between contractions. Alex's heart raced as he dropped everything and sped to her apartment, ignoring the honks of irritated drivers on the road. By the time he arrived, Emma was sitting on the couch, her face pale and covered in a sheen of sweat. "We need to get to the hospital," she said weakly, clutching her belly. Alex didn't hesitate. He gently helped her to her feet and guided her to the car. The drive to the hospital was tense, the air thick with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Emma gritted her teeth as another contraction hit, her hands gripping the seat tightly. "Breathe," Alex said, trying to keep his voice calm even though his own nerves were frayed. "You're doing great. We're almost there." Emma shot him a glare between breaths. "Easy for you to say," she muttered, her humor still intact despite the pain. When they finally arrived, nurses quickly whisked Emma away, leaving Alex pacing anxiously in the waiting room. The reality of what was happening hit him like a tidal wave. He was about to become a father. Hours later, the cries of a newborn echoed through the hospital hallway. A nurse emerged, smiling as she called Alex's name. "Would you like to meet your daughter?" she asked. Alex felt his knees go weak as he followed her into the delivery room. There, he saw Emma, cradling a tiny, swaddled bundle in her arms. She looked exhausted but radiant, her eyes softening as she handed the baby to him. Alex's hands trembled as he held his daughter for the first time, her small fingers curling around his. Tears welled in his eyes as he whispered, "Hi, sweetheart. I'm your dad." In that moment, everything else, his past mistakes, Sophia's revenge, his doubts, faded away. Nothing mattered except the tiny life he now held in his arms. The days following the baby's birth were a whirlwind of emotions. Alex and Emma worked together to care for their daughter, whom they named Amara, a name that symbolized grace and renewal. For Alex, every moment with Amara felt like a second chance at life. He marveled at her tiny features, her soft coos, and the way she seemed to calm whenever he held her. Despite the sleepless nights and the steep learning curve of parenthood, he found himself happier than he had been in years. Each diaper change and midnight feeding was a reminder of the commitment he had made to Amara and to Emma. Emma, though still cautious, began to see a side of Alex she hadn't known before. He was attentive, patient, and completely devoted to their daughter. He stayed late at the hospital with them, even after the nurses suggested he go home to rest, and he insisted on being there for every checkup and milestone. One evening, as Emma watched Alex rock Amara to sleep, a pang of emotion washed over her. She couldn't deny that he was trying, truly trying, to make amends for the past. And though her walls were still up, cracks were beginning to form. She wondered if it was possible to build something new from the rubble of their shared history. When they brought Amara home, Alex surprised Emma with a fully furnished nursery in his house. "I wanted her to have everything she needs," he explained, his voice hesitant. Emma was touched by the gesture but also wary. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "But don't think a fancy nursery makes up for everything." Alex nodded, understanding her caution. "I'm not trying to make up for the past with material things," he said. "I just want to give her the best start in life." Emma couldn't argue with that, and for the first time, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, Alex really was here to stay. One quiet afternoon, as Amara napped peacefully in her crib, Emma and Alex sat together in the living room. The sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm glow over the room, but the atmosphere between them was heavy. They both knew there were things left unsaid, wounds that hadn't fully healed. "We need to talk about everything," Emma said finally, breaking the silence. Alex nodded, his expression serious. "I know," he said softly. "I've been waiting for you to be ready." Emma took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Do you know how much it hurt when you prioritized everything over me?" she began, her voice trembling. "I gave you everything I had, Alex. I stood by you, supported you, and all I wanted was for you to see me. But you didn't. You were so focused on your career that I felt invisible." Alex's chest tightened as her words pierced through him. "I was selfish," he admitted, his voice thick with regret. "I thought I was doing it for us, but I see now that I was only doing it for myself. I didn't realize how much I was losing until it was too late." The conversation was raw and painful but necessary. They talked about their marriage, their mistakes, and the ways they had hurt each other. For the first time, they both allowed themselves to be vulnerable, stripping away the layers of resentment and pride that had built up over the years. By the time the sun began to set, there was a sense of relief between them, a feeling that, while the past couldn't be changed, it no longer had to define their future. "I forgive you," Emma said quietly, tears brimming in her eyes. "But you have to prove to me that this time, things will be different." Alex reached for her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "I will," he promised. "For you and for Amara, I'll be better. I'll be the man you deserve." With Amara now a part of their lives, Alex and Emma began to redefine what family meant to them. While their history was riddled with pain and disappointment, their shared commitment to their daughter became the foundation for something new. Alex made it a point to be present, not just physically, but emotionally. He rearranged his work schedule, ensuring he could spend as much time as possible with Amara. Emma, though still cautious, couldn't deny how much he had changed. She watched as he cradled their daughter, sang softly to her, and even stumbled through changing diapers. It was a far cry from the man who had once been consumed by his ambition. One evening, as Alex prepared a bottle for Amara, Emma stood in the doorway, quietly observing him. "You're getting good at this," she remarked, a faint smile playing on her lips. Alex glanced over his shoulder, his expression softening. "I had a good teacher," he replied, nodding toward her. The moment was simple but significant. For the first time, Emma began to see Alex not as the man who had let her down, but as the father of her child and a partner who was truly trying. Slowly, she started to let her guard down, allowing herself to trust him again. Their dynamic began to shift in subtle ways. Alex would often bring dinner over to Emma's apartment, and the three of them would sit together, laughing over the smallest things. Emma started sharing more of her thoughts and feelings, opening up about her fears and hopes for the future. And though the wounds of their past hadn't fully healed, the cracks were being mended, one day at a time. For the first time in years, both Alex and Emma felt a sense of hope, not just for Amara, but for themselves as a family. As the months passed, the bond between Alex and Emma deepened. What had started as a tentative co-parenting relationship grew into something neither of them had expected. They found themselves spending more time together, not just for Amara, but because they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Alex often caught himself marveling at Emma's strength and resilience. She was no longer the woman who had walked away from their marriage, nor was he the man who had taken her for granted. They had both grown, shaped by their experiences, and the connection between them felt stronger than it ever had before. One evening, after putting Amara to sleep, Alex and Emma sat on the couch, sipping tea and talking about their day. The conversation turned to memories of their past, moments they had both cherished and regretted. "Do you ever think about what might have been?" Emma asked softly, her gaze fixed on the cup in her hands. Alex hesitated, his heart aching at the vulnerability in her voice. "All the time," he admitted. "But I think about what could be even more." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Emma looked up, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Alex reached out, taking her hand in his. "I know I don't deserve a second chance," he said quietly. "But I'm asking for one anyway, not just for Amara, but for us. I want to try again, Emma. I want to build a life with you, the right way this time." Tears filled Emma's eyes, but she didn't pull away. "It's not going to be easy," she said, her voice trembling. "We have so much to work through." Alex nodded, his grip on her hand tightening. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes." In that moment, the walls Emma had built around her heart began to crumble, and she allowed herself to hope that they might find their way back to each other. Months later, Alex stood at the altar of a small, intimate chapel, his heart pounding as he watched Emma walk toward him. She was radiant in a simple white gown, her natural beauty glowing in the soft light of the room. Amara, now a bubbly toddler, toddled down the aisle ahead of her, carrying a basket of flowers and giggling as petals fell to the floor. The scene was far from the grand, extravagant wedding Alex had shared with Sophia, but it was perfect in every way that mattered. This time, there were no doubts, no secrets, only love, forgiveness, and the promise of a new beginning. As Emma reached his side, Alex took her hands, his eyes locked on hers. "You've given me more than I deserve," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "A second chance, a family, and a reason to be the man I've always wanted to be. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure I never let you down again." Emma smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "You've already shown me that people can change, Alex. I never thought we'd be here, but I'm glad we are. This is where we were always meant to be." The ceremony was simple but deeply heartfelt, witnessed only by close friends and family. As Alex slipped the ring onto Emma's finger, he felt a sense of peace he had never known before. This wasn't just a wedding, it was the culmination of their journey, a testament to the power of love, redemption, and resilience. After the vows were exchanged, they shared a kiss that was both tender and triumphant, sealing the promise of their future together. That evening, as they danced under the stars with Amora in their arms, Alex and Emma couldn't stop smiling. Their journey had been far from perfect, but it had brought them to this moment, a moment where their love, tested by time and trials, had finally found its way home. They were a family, and the future was theirs to create together. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comment section, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notifications so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video with someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.